Hi, welcome to Darren's Lightroom Tips. Today we're going to discuss editing in an external editor in Lightroom. Now before I get started, it's just good to know that sometimes it's not you didn't do anything wrong, you're not going crazy, it is just the program and that's the way it is. So just think back to an old saying that you may have heard, that if builders built buildings the way programmers wrote programs, then the first woodpecker that came along would have destroyed civilization. Now, anything can happen when it comes to software. Everyone has different computers, they're running different versions of the software, so while I'm recording this is Lightroom version 5.3, but when they come out with a new version of Lightroom or a different version of your software, it may not operate the same way. So let's just look at some of the basic fundamentals the way it is now, and this may apply and hold true in the future, or it may change and you'll just have to find what the little differences are. So number one, two different types of files will behave differently. RAW files will give you a different set of options than JPEG or TIFF files. Number two, which version of the software you may be using. If you're using an earlier version of Lightroom, then you may find it operates slightly differently or gives you slightly different options. And then number three is, which software are you editing your photos in an external editor? Photoshop CC, and by extension Creative Suite CS6, 5, 4, or whether you're using Photoshop Elements or any other program that can be assigned as an external editor in Lightroom. So with all of these variables, sometimes it's no wonder why we get lost or we get confused into what's going on. So I'm going to start with a RAW file. What I've done is I've identified my RAW file with a red border, and I've identified my JPEG file with a yellow border. Now sometimes when you lose your files after you're done editing, it's because of the way Lightroom brings them back in and sorts them. Down at the bottom of my screen, I'm clicking on the sort order, and I've set mine to file extension. So it's sorting it by extension name. .jpgs are going to come first, and then .tifs, and so on and so forth alphabetically. The default way that Lightroom will work is I believe it always comes back to capture time. So if I set mine to capture time, then my RAW file, the red bordered photo, comes first. So if you've run into a problem, it could just be that if it's sorted by capture time, then the edited version is going to come after the version you're working on. It's going to put it right at the end, as in it's the last photo in a whole series of photos. So that could be one mystery resolved or solved for you. For the purposes of today, I don't want these to switch back and forth between left and right, so I'm just going to set it to sort by file type, and this way they're going to stay in the order of JPEG file first, RAW file second. Where you click in Lightroom is important, so to make sure that I have no other files selected, only this one file, click on the blank gray area of the photo, and only this photo is selected. To get the options for Edit In, I'm going to right click and choose the option of Edit In, and I'm going to choose Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud. What it does when you choose this option doesn't bring up any dialog boxes. It creates a new version it creates a version of this in temporary memory. There is no new file created on the hard drive at this point. This is all just working with the memory within your computer. Loads the file with whatever editing you've done in Lightroom into Photoshop. And here it is, it's popped up on my screen in Photoshop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some text on here so we can see what's going on. I'm going to type in test and click on the check mark to apply it. Now, if I look to see what's happened in Lightroom, none of the photos have changed. So right now, this is just a temporary process that's going on in computer memory. What I need to do to update this photo and to make things happen is I need to save the work that I'm working on. Now, here's something that I learned. The old way that I used to work was to go to the File menu, choose the option of Save. I would then close the file in the program that I was working in and switch back into Lightroom. Well, now what's happened is it'll ask you about saving it again after you've done this, even though you've saved it. So my tip or my solution has been to, because I brought this in using Lightroom and I've tried this out, I've tested it out to make sure that it's true for me in the way that I've configured my software, is I will close the picture file in Photoshop by clicking here on the close document icon. And when I do this, it brings up the, hey, wait a minute, you did something to it. What do you want to do? So I'm going to say, yes, I want to save these changes before I close. So it's just going to close the open document. And I say yes. And it creates, at this point, a new document in Lightroom. I'm just going to switch back here to Lightroom. And what it's done is it's created a new TIFF file on the hard drive. So at this point, a new file exists on the computer. It has the text that I created in there, and it's maintained the red color rating that I had when I first created the raw file. What it does is it also puts the newly created TIFF file first, before your raw file. So you would normally think, well, this is a copy of my raw file, so it should be after my raw file, but that's not the way Lightroom works. Lightroom puts it first. So in the past, I would go and I would choose the second file because sometimes the changes aren't as easy to see, and I was thinking I was deleting my TIFF copy when I was actually deleting my original copy. Now Lightroom can be kind of quirky about this, so if you're not sure, as long as you're in the library module, in the grid view, if you want to see what's happening, hover the mouse over the image and you should see this gray dialog box come up to tell me that this is my 8631.nef and this file is my 8631-edit TIFF file. Apart from that, you can use the J key on your keyboard to cycle through your view options. And if you're not seeing any of these options, you just press and release the J key a couple of times and you'll cycle through all the 3 different versions that it can have. And then in the upper right hand corner of each thumbnail image, it will have the name of the actual file. So that could be another way that you could tell. It doesn't always make it clear as to which file is which. This is one of the things when you're using Lightroom you will have to learn. Okay, so now I've created this new TIFF file. And from this point, let's say that I want to go back in and I want to change something that I've done to my TIFF file. One of the great things about working in Photoshop is you can work in layers. Many other software programs that you will export your photos into will also support layers. TIFF files and PSD files will both support layers. So if I want to go back in and re-edit this, I'm going to right-click on my active TIFF file, the newly created file, and choose the option of Edit In and choose Photoshop CC again. This time it gives me 3 options. Option number 1, edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. So if I've done further editing to this TIFF file in Lightroom, this would apply any further edits that I've done in Lightroom to this file and then make a copy and open up the copy in Photoshop. It's going to behave the same way as it just behaved, where I won't see the new file on the Lightroom screen until I actually finish the processing and save it from Photoshop. Edit a copy will create a new copy immediately. Even if I cancel out and don't do any other steps in Photoshop, there will be a second copy created at this point that may not have any other changes or be no different than the file that I'm taking. Edit Original means it's going to edit the original file. Now I need to be clear. The original TIFF file is the one being edited, not the original raw file, which is my master file that I started this whole process with. So Edit Original means the original TIFF file. This is not advisable if you're shooting in JPEG. And in another seminar, I will describe and show you what happens to JPEG files. So for right now, I'm discussing raw files and a TIFF file created from the raw file. So if I choose the option here of Edit Original and click on Edit, this brings me back into my Photoshop program. The TIFF file maintains the layers, and over here on the right-hand side, what we have is we have the layers, and we can see that the text layer, my test layer, is there above the background layer, which is the image. I can come up and I can choose my Move tool. I'm going to move the position of the text down a little bit lower. I want it just above the horizon. Now I don't have to click on any check marks in Photoshop for this to happen because I'm moving it. Simply close out of the document, which will bring up the, hey, you made some changes, you want to save these? Say yes. And I go back into Lightroom all that's happened is on my original TIFF file, the text has been lowered down to match what I changed. I still only have this one TIFF file. So I've got my RAW file to the very far right, in the center is my TIFF file, and on the left is the JPEG file. Now if we want to see what happens if I choose another option, so right click, edit in, Photoshop, CC, and I say edit a copy, and click edit, we're going to see that immediately before it even leaves Lightroom that there is a new copy of this file. Just make my thumbnails a little smaller. There is a new file that has been created, so there's now two TIFF files and the original RAW file that have been created. Switch back here into Photoshop, and it's now working on a copy of this file. So if I take my text and I do something different with it, where I'll move it down here into the water, and then I'll close this document and say, yes, I do want to save these changes before we go. I'll come back here into Lightroom. Now I've got a new TIFF file with the text in the water, the originally created TIFF file where I moved the word test down in the sky, and then my RAW file. So the edit a copy does give me an option of duplicating what I've done, and I've got two versions of this going on right now. Now that can eat up a lot of hard disk space. TIFF files are very large, and unless you really need that extra copy of it, you don't need to do it that way. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this photo is active, and then I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to tell it to delete it from disk, which will remove it from Lightroom and nuke it off of the hard drive. I will also get this same additional unwanted copy if I choose the option of edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. It doesn't create the new file right away, but if I was to go in and do some editing, well, already I've got myself into a little bit of a problem here, because in my layers panel, this is not a TIFF file. It's flattened the image, and it has locked in everything that's been done into one layer. So I can't move the word test. That's now part of the physical image when I do it this way. So there's a lot of little differences that can happen from the edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, edit a copy, or edit the original. It really depends on what result you want to have. They each have their own use. They each have a lot of power to be very creative and to give you ultimate control. I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to say no this time. No, I don't want to save any changes. So this is working with the RAW files. Now working with the RAW file, if you're using Photoshop Elements or other software, it is pretty similar except in one area. And this time I'm going to choose Edit in Photoshop Elements. The only difference is that in Elements, it'll bring up this screen which grays out the other options. So in Photoshop, CC and CS, it just pops it into the program in live memory. And when you do it in Elements, it's going to create a copy of it first, and then it's going to update the copy you save afterwards. That's just the way that Elements and most other software will work. I'll say cancel. We don't need to go through these steps again. Now my JPEG file, if I click on that to make it my active file, JPEG files will always give you full control whether you're in Photoshop CC or Photoshop Elements, whether you want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, whether you want to edit a copy, or whether you want to edit the original. Now, if you do edit the original JPEG file, this is your original source file. Any editing you do is going to overwrite your original file. This is very dangerous because if you put text on this file, you would not be able to get it off of the JPEG file. That's the only file that you have, the only image you have from this photo shoot. You could forever ruin that image if you don't have already another copy, backup copy made. So what you'll want to do is if you're editing in JPEG, you want to be very careful that you do not choose Edit Original on your JPEG files. Now, if you have created the same layer with text on it as a TIFF file, then you could edit the original file, TIFF file, and that would allow you to move the text around. So there are some differences, and it just really, you have to know what's going on and know the difference between the JPEG files, the TIFF files, and the RAW files. So I hope that this clears up some of the confusion of what happens when you edit in other software. I could probably spend an hour going into all the little intricacies and details of what could happen here and what could happen there. But the best thing for you to do is to watch this a couple of times, get a feel for it, take a couple of photos that don't matter, open them up in a folder, and play with it. Try it in this program, try it in that program, try it and see what happens if you shoot in JPEG and edit the original in a JPEG. See if you can get it back again. All these things you want to try out on stuff that doesn't matter, only on a couple of photos when you've got some time. That way, when you're in the crunch time trying to get some editing done, you have a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more understanding. Learn by doing. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.